Could you tell me your name and title, please?
I'm Lynn Paul, and I am a senior research scientist at California Institute of Technology, or Caltech.
You are a global expert on everything Corpus Callosum related. Tell me about the different hats that you wear in this space and the piece of the puzzle that you're trying to solve.
It's strange, but yes, I guess I am the global expert in mapping out the behavior. Myself and my colleague Warren Brown, I was integral in starting the National Organization for Disorders of the Corpus Callosum, did that with a handful of families and scientists. In 2002, we formed that. And so I was the president of that and started that. And then in 2015, a group of us gathered and started the International Research Consortium for the Corpus Callosum and Cerebral Connectivity, which is the IRC5. And that is a group of scientists from around the world that are interested in the corpus callosum, and in particular interested in dysgenesis of the corpus callosum and understanding what causes it and its impacts. And it's a unique population of scientists because there are very few of us. We all tend to do this research kind of on the side because we just care about it. It's more of a passion project. We tend to be involved with the families and the science in multiple countries. And because we're the only ones doing it, it was really empowering to get together and realize we can do so much more together and work as an international community. So bringing that community together has been a part of my work over the last 10 years and is definitely part of my heart going forward.
Is it a funding thing? What is it about? Why are you all doing this on the side? Why isn't this? Why aren't there more of you?
That funding is a huge thing. And also there's a legacy that until I would say 20, 25 years ago, it was still very common for people in neurology to say that you could be born without a corpus callosum and be perfectly normal. And so the presumption was that anything that was wrong or any challenges a child or a person had that had ACC, it was not due to the corpus callosum. And my work has been focused on trying to understand, is there some behavioral profile that is specific to being born without a corpus callosum? So myself and Dr. Warren Brown have worked to define that and characterize it by pulling together people that had complete absence of the corpus callosum and no other brain malformations. So presuming that the corpus callosum absence is the primary concern, and then testing cognitively across the board and social skills and trying to understand what do they share in common. Is there a common denominator that is due to the absence of the corpus callosum? And so in 2019, we were able to publish what we think is the syndrome that is specific to the absence of the corpus callosum. And I think through that work and through the families speaking up more, there's more of an acknowledgement that corpus callosum dysgenesis is a significant concern. And so it's getting more attention, but that hasn't yet converted to funding. There's been some funding in the US for genetic work. So far in the United States, there's only been one nationally funded study on behavior. And it's been our study in the last 5 years, and it's now coming to an end, and we're trying to get a renewal. But that means that all of the work that Dr. Brown and I have done over the last 30 years, only 5 years of it had funding behind it. We've had small grants here and there. And I know Linda Richards has put in grants in Australia and also had struggles to get this kind of behavioral profiling done. So that is a fundamental issue.
And yet the answers to those questions are what affect people with a CCD every day.
Exactly. And if you think 1 out of 4,000 children, at least, has this diagnosis, and half of them, more than half, have no genetic cause, the only diagnosis they have is CCD. So researching that topic is really important for those families.
I have identical twins with partial agenesis, and I was told even from neurologists that I knew that it was, we would see someone in their 60s, they'd rock up to an ED, have an MRI, and that would be the first thing that they'd be aware of, and they had lived perfectly fine lives up until then. So I was getting it a lot that it'll be fine, there could be no impacts, but it just didn't make sense in my head that you could be missing this really important structure and you be completely fine. So understanding that baseline syndrome is just very important.
Well, and it's, can you function? Yes, there are certainly people that have functioned well in life. And over the last few years, we've met more adults that are in the 60s that just got the diagnosis. I have yet to meet a single one who would say, I had no clue that anything was different. I never had any challenges. Hands down, they say, oh, well, that explains. And then they go through things from school challenges to, even if they're high functioning, quote unquote, if they have graduate degrees. I mean, I think of one person who had graduate degrees, taught some graduate level courses, and was also homeless at one point, and said, that explains why as soon as there was any stress, I collapsed. Under optimal circumstances, I can perform really well, but there's no buffer in there.
That's important to know, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, could you give me just a rough overview of what the syndrome is at a baseline? Generally, what does someone with the CCD, how does it affect them?
So the core symptoms that we believe are due to the absence of the corpus callosum are reduced transfer from hemisphere to hemisphere. So information transfer, and it's not as extreme as if you cut the corpus callosum. And that's telling because it lets us know that if you're born without the corpus callosum, the brain has adapted. It's figured out other ways somehow to communicate, but it's not as effective as if you had the corpus callosum, right? The second one is slow processing speed. So just slowness in thinking things through. And then the third is difficulties dealing with complex, novel information. So anything that requires multiple types of thinking to be integrated, spatial and language, emotion and language, things done under time constraints, so there's a different kind of constraint, you see these difficulties. So the complex problem solving in daily life of adults is social skills. It's always novel to some degree. So that's why we talk a lot about social skills being a problem ultimately, but it's a secondary effect of the complex novel problem solving deficit.
Looking at interventions, if you had a kid with a CCD, what's the most important thing that you would do for them?
So it depends on the point of development, and it also depends on the child's kind of other issues and strengths and weaknesses. But speaking just to the corpus callosum, the issues around that, for a child, I would say reinforcing whatever is the next developmental challenge, mastery of that challenge, and really helping them get it. Let the brain figure out how to do it. I don't care how the brain will find a way if it's presented with the challenge and gets a lot of reinforcement to overcome it. And the more automated any skill is, the less cognitive effort you have to expend, which means then you can put that cognitive effort to other things. So that's fundamentally, I would say, reinforcement of the next step. And then also building blocks of basic social skills, working very clearly, concretely. Don't presume that a child is going to naturally get things, kind of get it from life and circumstance. They have to be taught explicitly, much more so than other kids. So being very clear about social skills early on and routines, setting routines that are, again, going to automate life for them. And then emotion regulation is the other component that I see can have long-term implications. It impacts how a child functions in school. It impacts how adults function in work, like the gentleman I mentioned. So the ability to have resilience emotionally and manage your own energy and know how to handle that is a key skill that goes through adolescence and adulthood in ACC.
So we can start early. That's the message, isn't
Yes.
there? With
Start
those
early with
building
those
blocks.
things. Build those skills in, and hopefully they will carry forward. I think once you get to teen years, then you have other issues of more explicit social issues, more safety issues, things to think about, and transitioning toward adulthood. And so the thing I would say for teens is it's really important to help your teenager with CCD master basic life skills that you might not think about teaching. But many times I've had parents come to me as their child had gone off to college or been at that transition point and had been doing fine at home, had been doing fine with a lot of support. And then they get into this other circumstance and they're not only supposed to go to school, but manage their time, do their laundry, eat their own meals, handle, and all of those skills to learn at once, things blow up. So if you start teaching those other life skills and automate them and have them be familiar, again, you're releasing processing.
I like that. Save the cognitive energy for where you need it for
where
that
you need
next,
it for what's novel. Yeah.
And on to adulthood then. What's really important if you're caring for an adult with a CCD? What would you do?
I think a couple things. Adults with CCD need to have as much independence and autonomy as possible. They're human beings, adults. And depending on their level of functioning, they may need protection. They may need more resources and support. As much as possible, I encourage families to work toward having that support provided outside the family. So family can be home. Family isn't social services. And because otherwise you end up in a lot of conflict. Being aware that kind of adolescent development extends. So you might be looking more toward 30 as a point of independence instead of 20. Changes your expectations. And knowing that they will continue to learn things. They will continue to learn skills. It's not, if they didn't get it at 20, it's all over. It's building and being patient with yourself as the person with CCD and with your family, knowing I am still learning. It's just going to take longer. I'm doing it differently. I've always done things differently. Someone with CCD's brain is wired differently. They've done things differently. They still have to do them, right? So that's, I think, the most important thing is helping them live autonomously. And I think the other component to that is, as the person with CCD, to acknowledge and take responsibility for your challenges. And knowing them, admitting we all have challenges. So knowing that processing speed might be a problem, or knowing that social things might be a problem, acknowledging that and developing ways to cope and compensate.
You're leading this incredible study, the infant study, and it's this first prospective longitudinal study of infants with a colossal agenesis. You're following them over a very long period of time. You're charting their development. What's the big hope for this project? It's
got a couple big goals. One is, as a person who loves the CCD community, I really want to help parents and practitioners who face big questions about what can we expect for this child, people who get this diagnosis in utero and are trying to figure out where to go and what to do, to have a better, more accurate prognostic system, to be able to say, this child's more likely to have serious challenges, this child's going to have limited challenges. And from that, if we can figure out which children are their general trajectory, we also can identify points of early intervention and then ease the trajectory. So that is the main goal, is to chart that. I think the other component is, we know that the corpus callosum is involved in a lot of other conditions. And so understanding how children with CCD may end up with these other diagnoses behavioral diagnoses, why some look autistic and some don't. Some have attention issues and some don't. Again, if we can find those markers in early development, then we can set up early interventions and we can help support kids earlier on.
So you envisage a day where you could look at a brain scan from in utero or, just after birth and say it's more than likely that based on the what we see structurally, is that the hope from that early scan?
Well, and that's one of the questions. Is it the scan or is it the genetics? For some, it may be the genetics that would tell us more. For some, it might be the scan tells the story. For some, it might be we're not clear, but these markers of early behavior tell the story. So we need to have a large sample that we have behavior, genetics, and imaging on so that we can start to parse out these components. And that's why I'm so excited about the International Research Consortium, because to have enough people gathered that we can look at their trajectories, we have to do it internationally. There are 45 countries represented in this infant study. Parents want to give that information out. And so, if anything, I get the most excited about the idea that I'm giving them an opportunity to tell the story and for that to inform future families.
And to change the wait and see diagnosis that parents get now when there's when it appears isolated or there's no clear genetics. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's over half of the kids with the condition that don't have that. They have no clear idea.
Clearly you're very heavily involved in the children's space because you co-authored the book AusDoCC and Me. Why did you write this? What did you want its impact to be?
That was a delight. And I want to honor the person who came before me, Kathy Schillmuller. Kathy and Gary Schillmuller started the first family organization in the U.S. in the early 90s and did it off their dining room kitchen table and talked to families all over the world on the phone. And their passion for caring for families is what led to developing the AusDoCC. And Kathy and I, and all of our hours spent together, started talking about the need for this kind of book and started working to draft it out. And I think it was Kathy who said, hold it, this needs to be told from the point of view of the person with CCD so that we are giving them the language to explain their condition. Because that was our goal, was to have a tool that they could explain. And so we wrote it from Dexter's point of view so that this is how you say it. And it was really just to explain. The thing that's been a surprise to me is how many adults come to me and say, oh, I took it to work because it explains my condition, which is, it just is humbling. I'm glad that it's helped. And that's been its goal, was to normalize, name, and empower. And I think for a condition that we can't cure, we're not working to change it, to fix it. We're working to help the people that have this optimize their living. And that means understanding how it impacts them so that they can make more informed choices. And parents can make more informed choices. As a mom told me once, we were at a fundraising. I was trying to raise money, and it's actually the gentleman who has funded the IRC5 handwritten checks. So far, that's all we've worked from. But he's a businessman, and he said, so why would I fund this if there's no cure? I was really glad that we had a little girl there who was adorable and perfect for this moment. And the mom said, if I didn't know what was going on, I would parent her very differently. And I would push her at times when pushing would actually make it worse. So by knowing what the symptoms and the syndrome, I can parent her in a way that's actually going to be effective. That's the goal.
And this space, there's a lot of talk about the challenges and the problems and the issues, but what is this community good at? What overall, are there any superpowers in here?
I will say there are some individuals with CCD who truly do have savant skills and some superpowers, which is we're just beginning to try to figure that out. And that's, again, the more participants we get and the more people who say, I'm fine, well, participate in research because we need to know why. So the savant skills, but they're not consistent. It's not like there's a superpower. I would say it's a community of people with a range of strengths and weaknesses, just like any other community. I mean, there's no strength that is specific to missing your corpus callosum. There are a lot of strengths that the people in this community bring from their relationships, from their own efforts, from their genetics. And I think recognizing that of course it's heterogeneous. Of course it's a diverse group. It's a group of people. They have this one area of their challenges in common, but the diversity of their gifts is as diverse as any other community.
And just finally, Lynn, for a lot of families, with the time of diagnosis, there's nothing that comes back on genetics. It appears that this is an isolated brain difference. And many families are told your child's going to be fine. They might be mildly affected. What would you say to that? How can they best prepare for their child's life?
Well, I've learned a lot, again, by meeting with professionals from around the world. And there are two key reasons I think you get such mixed messages. One is that from the point of view, from some physicians and maybe even from a neurologist, the issue, the way they're defining this is, are they going to be profoundly impaired? And anything that is not profoundly impaired is fine, which, well, it's just that. That's a huge spectrum. And if you use that criteria, profoundly versus impaired versus fine, then you're telling parents that a child's going to be fine and you have no idea what they think that is, nor really what it looks like. Does that mean they're going to be in special education? Does that mean they're going to need assisted living? Does that mean that they're going to be able to go to college and have a relationship and just have to monitor their energy levels? So that's a big, broad range. And that's where I think some of the confusion comes from, is what is that definition? And when I talk about it, I'm thinking in terms of long-term outcome. And often the prenatal counselors are talking in terms of the first few years of life. And they're saying, in the first couple of years of life, you're not likely to be in the hospital. You're not likely to have major, other medical problems. So in that perspective, your child's going to be in great shape. But great shape at 4 or 2 does not necessarily equate with independent living at 25. And so that's where we get the confusion. I think I would tell parents to ask, okay, you're saying that they can be okay. Can you give me an idea of what time span you're talking about and what do you define as okay?
Hence why these longitudinal studies are needed to give better predictions early on. Yes.
Exactly. And I feel more gracious toward the people that say those things now that I understand their perspective. So the reason I like the interactions with professionals, one was in France and one was in London, that helped me understand that's why you keep saying that, because you're talking about the first 2 years, or you're saying relative to profound impairment, they're going to be fine. Oh, now I understand why you're saying that, because I thought you were just saying things that made no sense.
And it's often to try and to be hopeful at that time as well.
Yes.
That's, in my experience, it is going to be fine. But again, that definition, well, what do you define as fine? That was a
and
sticking
some
point.
parents can only handle the immediate, and they need that fine. And some parents, you say that, and they're already thinking 25 years ahead. So,
well, all power to your studies, because we need the answers as soon as we can. Thanks for your time, Lynn.
thank you. My pleasure.